Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, Wes, and Chris, with perhaps occasional interruption as the hour goes along. We'll get to that if it happens. Along with you, there it is, on this Tuesday morning. I don't even know if your microphone picked that up or not. It probably didn't.
It didn't.
But anyways, we're along with you on this Tuesday morning. Obviously, news of the day, talked about it a little bit earlier. Juice Wells on Twitter last night announcing that he is intending to come back for another year as a South Carolina Gamecock. Obviously this has been speculation that's been going on so much this season with his foot injury that's kept him out since scoring that touchdown against Georgia, even going back to last week. Coach Beamer mentioned that he was practicing and maybe there was hope they'd come back for Clemson. Seems like that's not going to be the case, but again, sounds like 2024, another season of Juice Wells.
Yeah, it seems like that is the plan. I wish we had gotten like a graphic and an official, like, my name is Juice Wells. I'm returning to South Carolina next season. I think right now, safe to say, the plan is for Juice Wells to be back. He wants to come back. He's been telling people for a while that he wants to come back next year. And there was a lot of speculation. Most of it, I think, was just driven up online by people repeating other things they saw online that he might play this week. And obviously, Shane Beamer had not ruled it out. He said it's a possibility, and then there were some people having some fun, on Twitter, X, whatever. I thought that, I don't know if y'all saw the video of, you sent it to us. I had seen it as well, yeah, but of Juice Wells' face pasted on Stone Cold. I mean, that was phenomenal.
Well, and that was somebody that made it, that he responded to, and obviously a lot of people started replying hey, what does this mean? What are you trying to tell us? And I don't know if that prompted him to want to say this later, hey, let me go ahead and just put this out there, but he doesn't tweet a lot, so I thought it was interesting that happened yesterday.
Yeah, well, the speculation had sort of hit overdrive, and one thing Juice had told us back when we were going through all this leading into the North Carolina game, the season opener, and I can't remember if it was in an interview or just, it might have been at the kickoff party, Juice was talking about how he was just getting hit up by so many people asking him, hey, are you playing in the opener? Are you playing against UNC? And so I think this was his way to maybe kind of just try to answer that question for everyone. So, right now, again, the plan is, for him to come back. That's what he wants to do. And, obviously if that happens, it's a big deal for South Carolina when you look at the receiving core. You look at the guys they're going to lose from that group. The possibility of having him back at 100% and kind of being the guy we saw last year could be huge for them. And, Chris, I think it kind of just checks a box for you there. I looked at this receiving core, and, you're going to miss all the guys that you're losing from this group. We know what Leggett has been for this team. Mm-hmm. But I think you're going to miss Marion Brown as well. You need sort of some balance. You need to be able to have multiple guys. So, I think rather than going into next year saying, hey, who's the number one? Then, who's kind of the number two? Who's the next weapon? And then, who's the third starter? Obviously, a lot of attention is going to turn to what can Nick Harbor do this offseason in terms of development and getting better and stuff like that. But this kind of just puts you in a little bit better spot, much better spot potentially going into next year, where you're not saying, well, wow, do we need three portal receivers this offseason? I think you're certainly still going to look to the portal. I think you have to.
You have to.
But it does ease the pressure there a little bit, I think.
Yeah, if this happens, it would ease the pressure a ton. And I think you make a great point that is easy to miss in all this. You need more than one receiver on a team, right? And even as great as Xavier Leggett has been, you can look at this season and look at kind of the missing ingredients offensively. This is going to end up being, regardless of how this team finishes, beat Clemson, lose to Clemson, make a bowl game, don't make a bowl game, 7 wins, 5 wins, 6, whatever. It's going to be what could have been season, because everybody's going to think about, well, what if you would have had not just Xavier Leggett and Marion Brown for most of the season, but What if just those two the entire year? Because Marion Brown missed a good bit of time early in the year. Well, what if he would have had those two plus Juice Wells for the entire year? All right, what if you would have had those three with Spencer Rattler and an offensive line that was healthy the whole year? Maybe they had the hiccup against North Carolina with 9 sacks and a frankly, not a very good performance, bad performance, but then they kind of stabilized and got better and didn't have injuries. Case and Henry hadn't gone down on play 4. You didn't have 8 to 10 offensive linemen injured during the course of the year. Big what if, right? It seems like at South Carolina, now some of it's out of necessity. You're always going to have a leading receiver on your team, but there has been a knack here, I think, for there being some questions as to who's going to be the guy next year, and it tends to work itself out. Remember, we went into a year pretty recently where, man, who's going to be the top guy? Brian Edwards is gone. Well, Shi Smith ended up stepping up. Can he step up? He did. He became the guy. Xavier Legette. That may have been an even bigger stretch, and I'm doing air quotes for those of you who can't see me, everybody. But it wasn't a stretch from a talent standpoint, but from a production standpoint, it kind of was. But he has done it, right? You look at next year, and you're really having to take a big leap if you didn't have a Juice Wells as to who's going to be the guy. The Gamecocks have missed not only AB when he's been out, and obviously Juice Wells, but they've missed this season having Josh Vann and Jalen Brooks. They kind of had 5 starters last year. You go into next season, and it's obvious that, in my opinion, I think you're going to need some help, juice or no juice, from some freshmen and some transfers, and then a guy like Nick Harbor, et cetera.
I mean, I think you already, not to start getting too far ahead of ourselves, but it is part of the conversation because we're talking about the potential of Juice being in that mix. I think you're already, Mazio Bennett, you already kind of circle him and say he's a pretty developed wide receiver for a high school kid, has really come a long way, just like has worked really hard to already kind of try and develop his route running skills. Like, he's not just an athlete playing wide receiver. So I think he's a guy you already kind of look at that slot position at, within the 3 wide receiver spots and say, hey, Mazio could possibly play pretty early next year. Look at this preseason, Chris. We thought Eddie Lewis was going to probably make a big impact on this team, and that just really has not happened. And so, you never know what's going to happen, even when you hear the things that we hear, you never know how it's going to play out. I mean, in June, we were hearing all about Elijah Caldwell. And I mean, hopefully we've been doing this stuff long enough. Like, the people saying this were people that knew. Like, they knew what they were talking about, and it has not played out like that in reality. So even if you're within the program, you never quite know how something's going to play out in the reality of preseason camp and then the game. So I think kind of turning it back around to Legette, but the greater picture here, we heard all offseason how improved Legette looked, what a great offseason he was having. But I think you're always wondering, all right, does that mean he's going to have 600 yards receiving this year? And that would have been, well, hey, he made a huge step forward. Mm-hmm. I think to expect him to step up and be, hey, this guy is second all time is a completely different thing.
Yeah, he literally had this season that we expected Juice Wells was going to have. And when you look at the projections for where Xavier Legette is expected to go in next year's NFL draft, it's about where a lot of people thought Juice Wells was going to be had he gone through this season fully healthy, because he was thought to be one of the top 10 wide receivers in what is a very, very rich and heavy wide receiver class for 2024. But again, now that he's not played pretty much this entire season, he's fallen down those boards quite a bit. And at best, maybe now, and we know these conversations are ongoing. We know Xavier Legette told us he's talking to people and getting a gauge on where he might go in the draft. So Juice Wells doing the same thing, and I would imagine if he's getting drafted, it's going to be in one later round, 6 or 7 at this point in time. And you have the opportunity to go into camp and to get in there and show what you have. But when you're talking about the money that you would make being a late round guy as opposed to being a second, third, or first round guy is night and day. And with today's world of college football with NIL, it allows somebody like Juice Wells to say, you know what, I'm going to come back for another year. I'm still going to be able to make some money, not want to be making the NFL even at league minimum, but I'd be making something and giving myself an opportunity to work myself back up those draft boards and maybe become a second or a first round pick once again.
And general point, right? So, and I'm not just applying this to Juice, it's really for any college football player at South Carolina or anywhere. When you're kind of thinking about your future, you do have to weigh a lot of different things, right? Like, even if you're a late round pick, let's say you get on a roster, you're not going to be set for life immediately. But if you can stick, right,
Sure.
if you have the game, if you have the confidence, and if you want to kind of bet on yourself, so to speak, that's an option. I do think that I've seen, though, when you're measuring that against, yes, you're right, Tyler, NIL has allowed, I mean, there have been some guys, college football players, college basketball players that have been very open of, hey, I would have had to go pro, or I would have chosen to go pro if not for NIL. But it's also not like NIL, there's not this general bank of NIL
Sure.
that just prints money, right? Like that just,
Wait, there's not?
yeah, like it is.
Except at Texas A&M.
That's right. That's the closest thing to the money printer.
It just
But at every
comes
other
up out of the
place,
ground.
including here,
Literally.
like South Carolina's not A&M from that standpoint.
Right.
So it's one thing to say, well, gosh, just come back. There's NIL, like for Juice or for everybody. There's NIL, right? But like, how much? And what does the prospect think of weighing that? What does his family think? What does the collective or the brand deals or the businesses that would be fulfilling those NIL, obligations? What do they think? And so it's not just as easy as a general blanket statement for anybody. Again, not just Juice, of saying, well, just come back and get NIL money. Don't go to the NFL. Sometimes that can be a big gap,
Sure.
depending on the situation.
And again, the money's not comparable. The league minimum right now is $750,000. I highly doubt that he would be making that in NIL next year. And not that those numbers are public by any means, but it's kind of that thing like, okay, I have the opportunity to come back to potentially raise that draft stock where, again, I could be maybe a second or first round guy where suddenly I'm making millions of dollars on a rookie contract or something like that and make whatever he would end up making in NIL, which, again, it's not going to be comparable, but it's better than nothing compared to what they used to make years and years ago before NIL.
Yeah, and I think, if that opportunity wasn't there, you think Juice Wells would have been on this team this past season? I would say no.
Right.
Would Spencer Rattler, for that matter, have been on the team this past season? I mean, it does open up some windows of opportunity, and both those guys have been able to help themselves out quite a bit thanks to NIL, and so that kind of does speak to your point there, Tyler. And now, I think on the other side, though, you look at a guy like Leggett who did come back and, didn't have the career to the point of last offseason that he was able to go out and say, hey, I'm going to command this, and this from the NIL side, but now has done it kind of the old-fashioned way and worked his way into being, I think there's a chance he goes in the top 2 rounds. So, that's going to depend on a lot of factors that will play out between now and April.
Sure.
But he's certainly got himself into the conversation.
Absolutely. We'll have more on this as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, rolls along on this Tuesday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris along with you on this Tuesday. Very busy Tuesday. Of course, we will hear from Coach Beamer coming up at 1:30 for his weekly press conference, sponsored as always by Pete Ale Wine Pools and Spas. Jay and Elijah are going to be broadcasting live from Carolina Honda Powerhouse from 3 to 6 for the afternoon show today, where they will be giving away the EU 2200i generator that we've had on our contest page on 1075thegame.com. And then tonight, because it is Thanksgiving week, and I don't think Coach Beamer wants to do this on Thursday, Carolina Calls coming up at 6 o'clock. So we'll hear everything from Coach Beamer ahead of the Clemson game coming up this weekend. And there is the dun-dun interruption once again. Inside joke, he had to be there. But getting back to our conversation around Juice Wells announcing that he's coming back for the 2024 season, we talked about this from the perspective of what the wide receivers room is going to look like next year. Where obviously you're not going to have Leggett, You're not going to have AB. De'Carrion Joyner, who theoretically could move back to wide receiver, going to be gone because he's been playing here for 12 years, and you imagine you're going to have somebody out in the transfer portal, at least one that you're going to go and get. I think about this from the perspective of Lenore Sellers likely being the new starting quarterback next season, and how having a veteran receiver in Juice Wells, who's not only played a couple years at Carolina, but played a lot of college football in general, going back to his time at James Madison, having that sure number one next year is going to be very beneficial to him as well.
Yeah, I think to tack onto this conversation, my next question in terms of guys around him, what does Josh Simon do? What does Mario Anderson do? Those are two guys that I think don't obviously quite get the headlines of the press that, you know, a Spencer Rattler did last year when we were having this conversation, that a Juice Wells does last year and this year. But those guys in the NIL era, I feel like, are very important to keeping on your football team, you know, and making them feel special, I think. So, you know, when you have a guy who has an extra year like those two do, that aren't going to be high NFL draft picks, but are very just good, solid college football players, that's important too. And I think in terms of putting some veterans around Lenoris potentially for next year, that's part of this conversation for me as well, because then you kind of check another box. Obviously, you know, I think you look at some of those positions. South Carolina has some guys in the wings. You know, I think in short time we've seen some things from Connor Cox at tight end. We've seen some things from DJ Braswell stepping in there. But would you rather have that veteran who has played and who has done it? Of course you would. So I think, you know, the potential for Luke Doty to come back and play wide receiver, maybe to have a full year kind of developing at wide receiver. I think people don't give Doty enough credit for his ability just to go out there and help at receiver this year. So I think that's something to keep an eye on as well when you start to have that conversation about what could you potentially put around a young quarterback.
Well, and let me give you another one. Theme for the year, in keeping with that, the offensive line. You've got some guys that could come back or could move on for a variety of reasons. And a lot of different categories even in there. So Wes and I were talking before we even came on. Jalen Nichols. This was going to be his final season. A guy that was going to be your starting left tackle. A guy that may have some pro potential. Hasn't played all year. Has another year if he wants it. What will he do? Will he try to go pro? Will he stay? He's been here his entire career. He could transfer if he wants to. I'm not speculating on that. I'm just saying that is on the table. You've got some other guys that have been around a long time. We've already talked about Nick G, Vershawn Lee, Ja'Kai Moore. You know, you've got a lot of guys. So who comes back out of that group? You've obviously got some young players who are really good. Marquis Anderson will be back. But, you know, we've talked a lot this year about the offense, and a lot of the conversation has revolved around Juice and his absence and AB when he's been out. But the overarching thing that we've talked about more than anything is the offensive line. So that's going to be, I think, a critical part of this too.
We will go into next year, and of course there's going to be a conversation, but I don't think we're going to have to talk about the offensive line near as much as we did this year, you know, in my opinion. Now, will there be hiccups? Will there be times when people aren't happy with O-line play? Of course, that's everywhere. I mean, to the extent of what we had to this year. Now, I will say this, looking back, I kind of feel we talked about running back and edge all offseason, and I believe there was a point where we actually had the conversation, and it was, hey, is offensive tackle now the biggest concern with this team? And it kind of shifted, but I think, you know, add in Josiah Thompson, who is a 5-star according to On3, early enrollee type. I think that's still the plan. Dude, add him in there, potentially taking over a spot at some point, and maybe you slide Tree over to right tackle, or maybe you play Josiah at right tackle early on. I know a lot of people who follow high school football that think Josiah can be the future left tackle at South Carolina. So I think you're going to have some options there.
Well, and while it was certainly less than ideal that you had to ask Babalade and Baugh to jump into the starting role so early on in their career. That's going to be so beneficial for them going into what's going to be year number 2, having had this experience in the SEC, starting roughly half the season for both those guys, getting some of the spider webs and kinks out of the way, and hopefully be that much better next year when, again, you hopefully have a lot more of those pieces returning on the offensive line.
Yeah, for sure. And, turning it back to Juice, you need guys in this league ultimately that can win one-on-one battles and can do it consistently. And I think the difference in, an alpha, number one, hey, that's my guy, wide receiver, is can you do it consistently? All these guys we talk about, all these guys that have played receiver for South Carolina this year, they can do it. They're capable. We've seen it. Even the guys that are second, third, fourth, fifth on the depth chart this year, we've seen them get open and catch passes. But the difference is, can you do it consistently? Can you do it against the very, very best? And I think a healthy Juice Wells, we've seen that. We saw it all last year. We saw down the field ability. We saw run after the catch ability. He's a different player, different body type than Leggett. But in terms of what he can bring to that position, it is very similar in that they're diverse guys that can do different things. Some receivers, you say, that's a speed guy, or that's a slot guy. With both of those guys, you say, I can use them however I need. I can roll Juice into the backfield like we saw them do with Leggett. So all those things, just being able to add that in is important, I think.
Certainly excited to see what Juice is going to be able to do in his return season in 2024. And again, we'll continue to get you set for South Carolina and Clemson as the week rolls along. Women's basketball team in action last night, picking up another victory. We'll dive into that and hear from what Coach Staley and what she had to say on the 40-point win over South Dakota State. Coming up, it's Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
Former Navy SEAL Sean Ryan shares real stories from real people from all walks of life on The Sean Ryan Show.
Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett.
Where do the majority of UAP sightings happen?
Yeah, military installations, but I couch that. If they're going to fly here and check something out, they're going to see where our best and brightest are, I would assume. They asked me about if I'd seen any UFOs in Washington, D.C., and I said no. I said there's no intelligent life around here.
The Sean Ryan Show on YouTube or wherever you listen.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Westcoast along with you. That, of course, was the voice of Coach Staley last night after the women picked up a 78-38 victory over South Dakota State to improve to 4-0 on the season. And based on the clip that they've been scoring through those first 3 games of 100 or more points, this one's a little bit of a step back. Obviously, South Carolina was playing without Tessa Johnson and Tahina Powpow last night, so not quite as efficient from behind the arc, 0 for 12 shooting threes. But that's a South Dakota State team that, people forget. They went on the road to them last year and had a tough time with them in their building. That was a team that obviously ended up making the NCAA tournament. And last night was no different, as SDSU was able to hang around with them pretty well in that first half before South Carolina went on their run right before halftime, and then, of course, opened it up once you got into the second half. But a hard-fought win for the women in a 40-point victory last night.
Yeah, it just shows you where things are, that you win by 40, and it's like, they had a little bit of an off night. But no, that's a pretty good team, man. Like they're solid, and so they came out. They didn't seem intimidated, and it just goes to show you. And I know Don Staley talked about this, but when you're missing, especially with Powpow, a starter, somebody who's come right in and been such a spark for this team, and the ability to shoot the basketball. I told y'all I was at the Clemson game. She was shooting that thing, man. Like, she is so pure with her shot. And so you don't have her, and it just kind of changes, I'm sure, some rotations. It changes the flow of some things. And obviously, this is a talented, deep basketball team. You can win games even without people, even without some of your top players. But it does change things a little bit. Probably, honestly, Don Staley secretly probably happy to have some issues with kind of flow and stuff. Obviously not happy to have injuries, but happy to have a little bit of an off game to start, because you still want to keep you want those things to happen now. You want to see how your team's going to respond to them, how individuals are going to respond to those things, and you want to see hey, what's the best course of action if, what if Pow Pow goes down for a quarter in the tournament? What's the response? And so I think early on you want to work through all these things, and then you still win by 40. I mean, come on now.
Yeah, I mean, that is honestly the reaction I had. Somebody told me the score last night, and my first reaction was, oh, man, kind of ugly. And then you do the math, and you're like, 40 points. It's absolutely insane. And that just shows you, I mean, you set just such a high standard. And it is telling about how good this team is when they can play really, I mean, did not play well, you couldn't say, in the first half, and still win by that amount. I mean, if you kind of blindly looked at it and gave those shooting numbers, especially for the first part of the game, and you didn't know the opponent, or anything like that, didn't know if they won or lost, you could kind of give those numbers and say, take a guess. You might be inclined to say, gosh, did they get upset? No, they didn't at all. They won by 40.
Well, as always, the defense still as physical as ever, 52 rebounds compared to South Dakota State's 39. And what the having Johnson and Pow Pow the lineup did allow Full Wiley to make her first start last night, which she's somebody that obviously we're expecting to be, the future of this program and the next great superstar. So getting her, like you mentioned there, Wes, being able to work out some of these kinks and bugs a little bit earlier on in the season, giving her the chance to come in there and start against a non-conference opponent, a very good one like South Dakota State. That's going to be very valuable for her. She still went out there, dropped 11 points with 5 rebounds and 3 assists. Teams, as you would expect, last night led by Camila Cardoso, 23 points, 10 rebounds last night. So another double-double for her.
And I saw a clip online, Dawn Staley, talking about how they want Camila Cardoso to be a little bit more just aggressive and saying, I think she shares the basketball, she shares the spotlight so well that there are times where it sounds like they want her to go be like the alpha of this team and say, hey, you take over. You can take over a basketball game. Honestly, almost at will. Like there's not going to be there are going to be very few teams in the country that can actually stop her. And so, I think that'll be the most intriguing thing, honestly, about this basketball team. There are so many weapons, so many options. Does it continue to be a team that just they spread the ball around and everybody gets their piece, or will there be certain games where you have to say, especially when we start getting into postseason, hey, you're the best player on the floor. You have to take over this game.
Yeah, she is, and she's so good. It's kind of like all the other elements of this team. She's so good. I remember when they went out to Paris, and everybody's talking about Full Wiley because of the highlights, the moves. You look at the team and what they did, and it just kind of gets lost of how dominant Cardoso was, and she showed it a lot last season as well. I mean, she can just be an absolute force, and they do have so many pieces and so much depth, even missing some players, right? When they miss players, they still, you'd like to have them at full strength, obviously, and kind of have seen what this team is and can be at full strength. But they're good enough to where if somebody has an off night or the entire team has an off night, and I think a lot of that goes back to you still have a dominant inside force in Cardoso. And then this year, especially compared to last year and frankly a lot of years past, they not only have more outside, they have better outside shooting and they have more of it, I would say. You look at last season, that's the players that could shoot. Bree Bill was your 3-and-D player. Bree Hall coming off the bench, could make some threes. But this season, when you add Pow Pow and you add Full Wiley, and they've just got so many that can shoot from outside.
Well, and I look at a game like last night where, again, you're 0 from 12 shooting, but you still end up winning by 40 points. It was very reminiscent of how they played most of their games last year, where they just beat you down with that physical style of defense to where you can say, hey, we didn't really need to shoot 3 ball to be successful. And through those first 3 games, again, scoring 100 or more points in each one of those, it's like you're still playing that dominant defense. But now you have this extra factor on offense that makes you even better all the way around. And again, once you get Pow Pow back in the lineup and you get some of that 3 shooting back up, that's going to make them even more dangerous. They go against North Carolina's in a couple weeks, Utah in the non-conference, and of course the slate of SEC teams that you have to face once the new year comes around.
Well, I think it's nice to know you have multiple options, just not in terms of players and weapons, but in terms of how you can win a basketball game. And so for them, I think last year we saw Iowa, probably the only team in the country that from a matchup standpoint could beat South Carolina and had just a way of playing that, you can get into the officiating and all that as well if you want. But just the way they play was a little bit of kryptonite for South Carolina if they were going to not hit open shots. And so, I think this is a team most nights, and it's not just Pow. Like, they have other shooters, but most nights they're just gonna shoot the lights out of the thing and blow teams out of the water. But there will be nights when maybe you're missing somebody or maybe you're just off. That's one thing about basketball. If you're completely reliant on like the 3-ball and we see it in men's basketball all the time, these teams that can shoot the lights out and they'll upset a team that they're absolutely not supposed to beat when they get super hot. But then they'll drop some games they're not supposed to because they just have an off night shooting. This team now they've got a backup plan that still makes them better than pretty much everybody else in the country. And I think, honestly, with their shooting ability when they're at full force and when they're on, they would run Iowa out of the gym.
Sure.
If they played today.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think.
No, and we know when you're very one-dimensional and all you can do is shoot 3 balls, you live by it and you die by it. And like you said, sometimes you can go out there and upset a great team, and sometimes you go out there and shoot 20% and have a terrible night. So the fact that South Carolina has so many layers to this team is one of the many reasons why they're so successful. They'll be back in action coming up on Black Friday, actually, as they will take on Mississippi Valley State. You'll be able to listen to that game at 1 o'clock on our sister station, ESPN 1320 WISW. Then they play next week. That is going to be next Thursday, taking on a number 18 North Carolina team on the road as the non-conference slate rolls on for the women. The men's team back in action a week from today in the SEC ACC Challenge, taking on Notre Dame as they look to improve to 6-0 to start the year under year 2 of Lamont Paris. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, a former Gamecock bringing his college career to an end. But obviously somebody that had some fond memories in his time here in Columbia. We'll talk about that coming up. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on the game.
Welcome to Talkville,
The ultimate Smallville rewatch podcast. I always drove the cars, the Porsche, Ferrari, Lamborghinis. They were always a little skeptical, but sometimes they go, all right, Rosie, just go up where the stop sign is and turn the car around, and we'll give you your cue on the walkie. And I go, great. And they're like, Rosie? I'm like, yeah, dude. Oh, yeah, this stop sign? They're like, yes, there's only that stop. Oh, okay.
Jump in now or catch up on any of the past seasons of Talkville on YouTube or wherever you listen.
His right name. They got his name right the second time around there. Jason Brown with touchdown pass to Josh Vann on the night that would lead to the legend of Jason Brown at South Carolina. 40-17 win that night. He obviously would go on to Jackson State, where he has wrapped up his career this past weekend as they fell to Alcorn State 41-6. Put out a nice message last night on Twitter, just kind of thanking everybody for all the stops that he made along his way in his college career. And obviously he's somebody that, again, is going to be remembered very fondly for his time here at South Carolina.
I mean, I'm still in this take from a fan. I can't remember who said it. I promise I would give you credit. But somebody said either on our board or on Twitter, like, hey, if Jason Brown hadn't stepped up and, if Zeb Nolan hadn't stepped up, then the year one may have gone very, very differently. And so Jason Brown, he made some plays for South Carolina against Florida. He made some plays for South Carolina against Auburn that gave them a chance to go win the game. And so it's a pretty talented kid, man. Like he came from St. Francis as a transfer along with E.J. Jenkins, and helped South Carolina win a couple of games. And I think he'll always be remembered by that. Look at the responses to that post. All the Gamecock fans that are in there, showing Jason Brown some love. Pretty cool, man. And, I think he's one of those guys. He's going to be successful. Great worker, great personality. And from what I understand, he may be making an appearance on a future Gamecock Central takeover show or podcast. So be on the lookout for that.
Absolutely.
Had a fellow impressionist, Tyler. Have you seen Jason's impression?
I've not.
Oh, man, you're in for a treat.
He does Bobby Boucher.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, I'm excited now.
We will show you. It's quite good. He was part of some big moments. One of Wes's favorites was the so much time for activities social media post from Gamecock football. That was after the Florida game when that exact clip we listened to. Josh Vann completely by himself in the end zone after
the best
that
video
ad-lib.
they've ever done.
Great video. The Auburn win, right? Some of the throws that Jason Brown made in that game. And you know another thing that stands out, Wes, you'll remember this. We actually had, this may have been, I don't know if it's the first, it's certainly one of the first Garnet Trust interviews with Jason. And we had it scheduled, and it just so happened to be after the Missouri game in 2021. And South Carolina went to Missouri. It did not go well. And Jason had kind of a rougher game. And he came on there on Monday, answered all the questions, totally honest, owned the parts that he, felt like he needed to own. And I always thought that was pretty cool, because some guys may have bailed out, and I may have, I would have understood. Hey, you had a rough game Monday. Maybe you don't want to talk. And he came on there and answered him. So he was certainly part of some big moments and a good dude, too.
And according to this tweet that he put out last night, thanking everyone, it looks like he has some aspirations to jump into coaching, be a quarterback coach.
Yeah, we'll see what's next. And he got the most of his eligibility, bounced around a little bit.
So he played a lot of college football.
Played at many places. He's got a lot of jerseys he can hang up on the old mantle. But, yeah, happy for Jason, man. I remember actually sitting literally right here when I got a text that he was going to transfer from South Carolina. And a big part of that was because I believe, I don't want to speak for Jason, but I think this is safe to say, number 7 was about to be rolling into Columbia, which obviously would have affected his chances of starting quite a bit.
No, absolutely. And then went to VT last year and then ended up at Jackson State. Again, their season coming to an end this past weekend against Alcorn State, but obviously somebody that meant a lot to the program in Coach Beamer's first year. And like I said, who knows what the story of that first season would have been if he doesn't come in and step up in those couple games that he got an opportunity to play there. And again, last night, very, very thankful for his time here at South Carolina. And I was just kind of scrolling through what you said, the people responding to it from the South Carolina fan base, thanking him for what he did, and excited to see what his next step's going to be.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm sure he probably doesn't quite know that yet, but we'll all be following along and hoping that he has a great career ahead in whatever he does after football. And like I said, looking forward to at some point in the future catching up with Jason, and we'll let him do some impersonations as well. We'll see what his Leggett impersonation is.
I bet he does a good one.
Yeah, he's got to have one.
Half redneck, half posh. 100% fun. Trey Crowder and Corey Ryan Forrester try and learn fancy culture in putting on airs.
The host of the Medium Popcorn Podcast, Brandon Collins and Justin Brown.
Okay, so Paddington 2 had like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes for years.
You guys ruined that?
Justin came in and took it down 2 points because of his rating. That's the time we started getting death threats.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. People worship that movie.
Putting on airs. The podcast is on YouTube and wherever you listen.